Hello, it's Sarah in the BBC Washington Bureau.
And it's Anthony across the table from Sarah in Washington, D.C.
Just back from a trip?
Back from Kentucky at a big congressional race there, which we are about to talk about.
Yeah, we will get on to the slush fund and this amazing deal that Donald Trump did with the IRS later. First, let's pick up on the fact that yesterday, Tuesday the 19th, was a little kind of mini Super Tuesday in America with 6 different states having primary elections where they choose the candidates for the Republican and Democrat parties who will go into the midterm elections in November. And we're interested in these because in a lot of them, inside the Republican Party, there was a more establishment candidate and a Trump challenger. And in most cases, in fact, I think all cases, it was the Trump candidate who won, wasn't it, Anthony?
Yes, it was. And in Kentucky, most notably, it was Thomas Massie, the longtime iconoclastic rebel libertarian candidate, congressman who lost to a Trump-backed political novice, Ed Galbraith.
It was a good night for Donald Trump, really, wasn't it?
It was a good night for Donald Trump. The marquee contest was that Kentucky race. And, well, was he able to stand up to Donald Trump? Was he able to win re-election despite facing the full force of Trump's financial and endorsement onslaught? No, he lost. And he actually lost by about 10 percentage points. So it wasn't even all that close. Let's listen to Massie give his concession speech, and maybe he can explain why he ended up coming up short.
We didn't lose this race because we didn't have enough money. You know, it is the most expensive race ever. I think when they add it up, right now they can count 35 million. I think when they add it up, it's going to be a lot more than that because on our side, we know we spent more than 15 million. And we were able to go toe-to-toe. There was never a week that we got outspent more than 2-1 in this entire race. Look, for 14 years, those SOBs in Washington tried to buy my vote. They couldn't buy it. Why did the race get so expensive? Because they decided to buy the seat. And it got real expensive for them. Look, they used a lot of dirty tricks, but we stayed the course. We didn't bend a knee. We didn't throw a foul ball. We didn't do any of those things. We didn't kneecap anybody. We had lots of opportunities to try a lot of stuff like that, and we never did it. We ran a clean race.
Yeah, so that is very interesting that Thomas Massie is saying that it wasn't specifically about the money, even though tens of millions were spent on what's now the most expensive primary race in America. He was being challenged by a Donald Trump-backed candidate because he had voted to release the Epstein files, he had voted against extra spending that would have increased the national debt, and he voted against the war in Iran. All things he'd broken with Donald Trump on, but he said he was the one holding the flame of Trumpism because these were all things that Donald Trump campaigned on but just wasn't delivering in office, and pointed out he'd been loyal to him 90% of the time, voting with him in Congress. So, Anthony, you were there talking to voters. You must have met people who in 2024 had voted for both Donald Trump and Thomas Massie, and they're now being asked to pick between the two of them.
Right, and a lot of them were conflicted. I talked to some people who voted for Massie, who was a little upset about the fact that Trump was campaigning against him. I talked to some voters who voted against Massie, but liked him as a person and felt they kind of admired his stand on principles, but that didn't matter. And when it came down to it, Massie was making the case that he was standing on principles and that his voters should side with him because of these stands. And a majority of the voters, it turns out, did not like the fact that he was breaking with Donald Trump. I mean, as an example, this is Alan. He was a Republican I spoke with at a coffee shop in Union, Kentucky, and he laid it out pretty clearly why he was not supporting Thomas Massie.
Massie's been there too long, and he does not represent Kentucky any longer. All his, and he takes pride in, of course, opposing Trump so that he can get all those interviews and stuff like that. And then, so then what do you really stand for? I mean, so you have to decide. I mean, his buddy's Ro Khanna. Do you stand with Ro Khanna or do you stand with Donald J. Trump? And
right.
made his bed, so to speak.
So you like Galbraith, or is it just that he is the other?
I do. I've met him a couple times, and I do like him. And I think he's a principled person, yeah.
The kind of guy who's going to get to Washington to support Trump's agenda.
Supports Trump's agenda and stand for the Kentucky values, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Trump's agenda doesn't always line up with, but, he is the president, he was elected, so we have to, he represents all 50 states, so it may not perfectly align with Kentucky, but it's closer than the other side.
So, Ro Khanna, that's a reference to the Democrat from California that Massie worked with in getting those Epstein files released with a vote in the House of Representatives. But I think what you hear there is that Massie was too enamored by his press clippings, that Massie wasn't focusing on sticking with Trump and moving the ball forward and being a team player, and that was what sank him. So all of the explaining I heard on the campaign trail, all of this, I vote with Trump 90% of the time, all of this, I'm really trying to just improve the bills, not destroy them. None of that mattered. It was a contest framed between Donald Trump and Thomas Massie, and voters in that district picked Trump.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And if he had had Trump's backing, he would have won, presumably.
Easily.
It's all about the president, even though he wasn't on the ballot.
Yeah, he had Trump's backing in 2024, and he coasted to victory, even though he was still the kind of guy who voted against some of the Republican priorities because they raised the deficit too much. He was always an anti-interventionist. Another thing is that because the House has been so closely divided during Donald Trump's second term, where just a handful of votes are the difference between winning and losing a vote, there was a big spotlight put on Massie. So his quirkiness, his stands on principle, which could have been written off when he was in a comfortable majority at previous times, now became really pivotal. And that was what I think got under Donald Trump's skin.
So this is fascinating, I think, for two reasons that take it way beyond Kentucky and make it a national issue. And those are, we're seeing polls that Donald Trump is the least popular he has been in this term at the moment, and yet he's winning these kind of electoral victories. And also, when you see somebody who has rebelled a bit on principle, like Thomas Massie, losing his primary, every other Republican in Congress is going to look at that and think, that's what happens if you stand up against Donald Trump. He's not the first to lose a primary for going against Donald Trump, but he's probably the highest profile and the one who maybe had the best chance of actually managing to hold on to Kentucky despite Donald Trump going against him. So I think there's a lot we can learn from this.
Yeah, that was the feeling, that he had the best chance to stand up to Trump and to be the new normal going up against an unpopular president. That, as you mentioned, did not turn out to be the case, but he does join a long list of Republicans, including Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, who lost to a Trump-backed rival in the primary contest in Louisiana on Saturday. Also, we've talked about in the past those 5 Indiana state senators who wouldn't redistrict in accordance with Donald Trump's plans, and the Trump campaign turned against them, and they got voted out of office. I think there is a feeling among Republicans who have any kind of long-term hopes of sticking around and rising through the ranks of the party that if they take stands that go against Donald Trump and if they attract his ire, they're toast. They're not going to be able to win, not only win general elections, but even just become the Republican nominee, no matter how long they've been in office, no matter how many friends they have outside of Donald Trump. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, look at Lauren Boebert, Republican Congresswoman, who used to be very, very MAGA and loyal to Donald Trump. We've talked about her on the podcast before. She went down and was campaigning with Thomas Massie in Kentucky, and immediately Donald Trump started putting out on Truth Social that he was looking for somebody to challenge her in a primary. Who would stand up against Lauren Boebert, because there she was daring to campaign for an opponent of Donald Trump's. Although it turns out that she was cleverly doing this after the filing deadline in her state, so nobody will be able to challenge her on that. But Donald Trump has also been posting on Truth Social a graphic saying that he had 37 wins on May the 19th and 0 losses, and he's counting them across the 6 states that were voting in primary elections on Tuesday, and saying that his candidates won in every single time. So it does make him look very, very preeminent in the party. But this is at a time when he is prosecuting a war in Iran that lots of diehard Republican, certainly influencers, the people with loud voices in MAGA, don't like. We know that everybody is feeling the price rises, particularly in gas, in petrol, but that's feeding through into groceries and all sorts of other things. He's got a really low approval ratings in opinion polls that sample the whole American population. And yet, here he is, apparently able to command the voters in these Republican primaries.
Right, and that is his remarkable ability. He has remade the Republican Party in his image, and even as he is struggling, he has been able to weed out people that he finds insufficiently loyal. I mean, let's talk about Bill Cassidy again a little more. He's at Louisiana senator. This is him in his concession speech talking about why he lost.
You know, I've had the privilege of representing the state of Louisiana for 12 years. I've been able to participate in democracy. And when you participate in democracy, sometimes it doesn't turn out the way you want it to. But you don't pout, you don't whine, you don't claim the election was stolen, you don't find a reason why. You don't manufacture some excuse. You thank the voters for the privilege of representing the state or the country for as long as you've had that privilege. And that's what I'm doing right now.
So, an incumbent senator doesn't get the backing of Donald Trump and goes down to defeat. We've got another one, actually. Just in on Tuesday, Donald Trump endorsed a challenger to John Cornyn, the incumbent senator in Texas. He endorsed Ken Paxton, the state attorney general. That contest is on Tuesday. I know we talked about it in the past, but here's another chance next week for Donald Trump to oust an incumbent. And the thing about Cornyn is he's not even really that anti-Trump. He never had a clear break. Cassidy's thing was he voted to convict Donald Trump during his 2021 Senate impeachment trial. We've talked about all the various transgressions that Massie has had. But Cornyn tried to win Donald Trump's favor. He was about to name a highway after Trump in Texas. He had proposed a bill to do that. He had been campaigning with photos of him next to Trump. And Trump, nevertheless, came out with a True Social post endorsing Paxton, saying that Paxton was the true loyalist, that he was real MAGA, and Paxton had gone to New York to support Trump when he was on trial. He was one of the people who were leading an effort to overturn the 2020 election. So Trump rewarded that loyalty. He said that Cornyn was a nice guy, but that he wasn't there when times were hard, which I assume means his post-defeat time out of office in 2021, 2022, and that was just not good enough.
That sounds like a very good reason to be going to Texas, Anthony. And I know you never turned down the possibility of a trip to Texas.
I know there's some barbecue waiting for me. I might have to do that. But it is interesting in this case because Cornyn didn't have that break. Cornyn is very popular in Congress. He has a lot of friends in the Senate, a lot of Republican friends in the Senate. He's a former member of the Republican leadership, for crying out loud. He was the majority whip. That's the guy who organizes and tries to get people to vote all together in the party. He is an active fundraiser for a lot of his fellow Republicans. So when Donald Trump came out in favor of Paxton, it really angered a lot of Senate Republicans who felt like Trump was betraying someone who was a team player. So I think that hints at some of the downside of what Donald Trump is doing here. He may be purging disloyal or quasi-loyal members from his party, and next year they may be replaced by real diehard MAGA faithful. But in the meantime, he's making a lot of enemies in Congress and in the Senate, and he's also creating a lot of freewheeling members who are retiring either forcefully or by choice, who may not be willing to march in lockstep with Donald Trump's legislative agenda for the rest of this year.
Yes, plus also, I think in Texas it's particularly interesting, isn't it, that what they might be doing is selecting a candidate who is Trump-approved, but who might be less popular with the voters. Because, to put it politely, Ken Paxton has quite a lot of baggage, whereas the Democrats have actually selected, well, a lot of people think is one of their most electable candidates for the Senate, James Tellerico, somebody that we should definitely be watching. And so that might make it a much, much tighter race for the Senate seat in Texas. So that would be astonishing as a result of this. What Donald Trump had achieved was turning Texas blue.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats have been waiting for that for decades, and this, they feel, is maybe maybe their best chance. At the very least, Republicans are going to have to spend a lot more money on this race than they would have if Cornyn, with his deep pockets and fundraising prowess, would have had to done. So it's a risk. It's a big risk by Donald Trump. And the other thing is, I mentioned these kind of freewheeling votes now, these freewheeling members, the YOLO conference, the YOLO caucus in the Senate. Cassidy just yesterday came out against funding Donald Trump's ballroom through Senate appropriations. He voted in favor of limiting or advancing a measure to limit Donald Trump's war powers on Iran. He was critical of this weaponization fund that the Justice Department has set up, a $1.8 billion fund to pay off people who feel like they were victims of anti-conservative weaponization. So all of a sudden, he now is a free agent. And you could see Cornyn do the same thing. All of a sudden, things might get a little more complicated for Trump.
Yes, and you're being very polite there, saying the YOLO crowd. I've seen you in some of our shared group texts calling them the YOLO/DGAF crowd. But
we won't explain what that acronym stands for.
They can Google it. I doubt very much that any Americasters don't know what that means, but if they don't, the internet is there for them. But let's pick up, Anthony, on what you were talking about there. This new fund that was announced yesterday. It's not quite $1.8 billion. It's $1.776 billion to commemorate.
I see what they did there.
America's 250th birthday. What better way to commemorate it than setting up a fund that looks as though it's there to reward Donald Trump's friends and allies, because it's going to sit within the Justice Department. And anyone who thinks that they were the victim of weaponized lawfare, as Donald Trump always calls it, basically, the people he would say are eligible for this are those who were needlessly and wrongfully prosecuted under the Biden administration. They can now apply to be compensated for that. And it will be decided by a panel of 5 people, not been appointed yet, but will be appointed, in fact, by one of Donald Trump's appointees, Todd Blanche. And so the criticism is that this is just there to reward his friends. But the reason it came about was also kind of astonishing, wasn't it, Anthony?
Yeah, Donald Trump was suing the IRS. The president was suing his own IRS for the unauthorized release of his tax returns, years of his tax returns. It took place. They were leaked to the New York Times in September of 2020, so just before that 2020 presidential election that Donald Trump lost. And he was seeking damages, $10 billion in damages from the IRS. It turns out this was a contractor who got a hold of them and leaked them. It wasn't some sort of an IRS official. So Donald Trump still was saying that this was the IRS's responsibility and he should be compensated. But then Donald Trump dropped it, striking a deal with his own Justice Department, and this $1.8 billion slush fund is the result of it.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? So you've got a judge who wasn't sure that she would allow the case to proceed because basically you've got Donald Trump in the White House, but you've also got Donald Trump in charge of the IRS. So it's not right that they should be engaged in a legal battle together, but it's absolutely fine for them to make a cozy little sweetheart deal behind the scenes and come to a settlement. It doesn't really seem to me like that's certainly any more ethical, even if it might be a little bit more legal. So yes, you've now got this fund and not total clarity on who is going to be able to apply to it or what the criteria would be to get compensation. Because if it is the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, who, of course, used to be Donald Trump's private personal lawyer as well, very, very loyal to Donald Trump, he's going to appoint the panel that will make the decisions here. And I guess the people applying could include Steve Bannon, for instance. He went to jail for a few months during the Biden administration for refusing to testify in front of Congress. But really controversial would be if Jan 6th rioters, who some of whom were convicted and imprisoned, but then were pardoned by Donald Trump on day one, they might not just be taking those pardons, they now might be looking for compensation. And that caused a bit of a fuss yesterday. I was in the White House briefing room when the Vice President J.D. Vance came to talk to us, and he was asked several times about this and whether or not it would be right if Jan 6th rioters who had attacked police officers were to be compensated out of government money.
I have a question on the war, but just to follow up, you previously told me that anyone who assaulted a police officer on January 6th should go to prison. So why not rule out giving them taxpayer-funded money?
Well, Caitlin, what I said is we're going to look at everything case by case.
But why not rule it out?
Because, Caitlin, there are people who I don't know their individual circumstances, and I don't rule things out categorically when I know nothing about a person's individual circumstances. Let's say a person is accused, let's just say hypothetically, a person is accused of doing something that they never actually did, that they got a kangaroo court, that they had a judge who mistreated them. I think that we should look at those things case by case. We're not making commitments to give anybody money. We're just making commitments to look at things case by case.
The Vice President wasn't the only person being asked about this fund. Todd Blanche, who, as we've said, was Donald Trump's own personal attorney, now the acting Attorney General, was giving evidence in front of Congress also yesterday. So he too was being asked about this slush fund. And he said he couldn't rule out money being used to compensate January the 6th rioters. Here he is being questioned by the Democrat Jack Reed.
Well, this all seems to be an obvious abuse of power by the Department of Justice, by the President. He negotiated essentially with himself. You're his appointee. The IRS are his appointees. He's the plaintiff. And the American people, I don't think, are surprised that suddenly all this money is going to his friends or people that he, in his orbit. Will you ensure that none of this money goes to anyone convicted on the January 6th attack on the Congress?
Well, the commissioners will determine who is eligible to receive the money.
And who are the commissioners?
They're not named yet.
Who will name them?
I will, or the Attorney General will. It's not me.
So, with the suggestion of the President of the United States.
Excuse me?
With the suggestion of the President of the United States, your boss.
I do not make suggestions. I will.
No. He will make suggestions to you.
I have no idea if he will or not. I really don't. I have no idea if he will or not.
I would be shocked if he didn't tell you exactly who to put on, and I'd be more shocked if you did not put them on. This is a travesty of the law in the United States and the Constitution. You know, this whole hearing, I think, is exposing something, which is, to me, very frightening. You're a very gifted lawyer. But from my perspective, you have very little faith to the Constitution and the people of America, and you're the President's consigliere.
Your perspective is completely wrong, Senator,
well,
respectfully.
I think the facts will prove me right. Thank you.
Yeah, and then, Anthony, the bit that really blew me away was when a bit later in the evening on Tuesday, it was announced that there's another provision in this agreement which is protecting Donald Trump and his family from IRS audits. There's actually a part of the agreement that says the government is forever barred and precluded from examining the tax returns of Donald Trump, his family, his company and related companies. And we know that actually there were audits going on that could possibly have actually ended up with hundreds of millions of dollars being owed to the IRS. And does that mean the Trumps are off scot-free?
All those audits apparently are going to go away. And anything pending, which there were pending audits, known or unknown. So that means that even if there is something that comes up about his past tax returns that wasn't currently pending, that the IRS didn't know about right now, they still cannot prosecute Donald Trump for it. So basically, the slate is wiped clean for Donald Trump in this agreement, and anything he's done up until this point, apparently the IRS can't touch. It's kind of funny. I'm looking at the actual document here, and at the very top it has the date, May 19th, 2026. It has May, and then there's like a little blank space, and then it's clear that they typed the date into that blank space with the underscore to make it yesterday's date. It makes you wonder how long this document had been floating around, and then they're like, okay, let's do it today, and put the May 19th date in there.
Interesting. Yeah, so you can imagine that it is something that Trump has had on his agenda for quite a while. And it just seems so naked, doesn't it? Setting up a nearly $2 billion fund, which it's obvious are going to go to Trump friends and allies. And yet we're talking about this as the same episode as we're talking about how Donald Trump has secured his hold on the Republican Party, how voters will reject congressmen, senators that they've been with for years and years if Donald Trump tells them to. And despite his poor polling ratings across the country, he really still does have his loyal supporters as loyal as ever.
Right. He's tightening his grip on the party. But I do think it's interesting that with these Republican incumbents who are going to be leaving office at the end of the year, they may be willing to take a stand. And it's a narrow Senate. It's a narrow House of Representatives. You could see them siding with Democrats to block this deal or to block it in a way that can be challenged in court, because the Constitution says that Congress has the power of the purse. They're the ones who have to authorize money being spent. So I'm not sure the grounds for which the Justice Department is accessing these funds and what their justification is for doing it. But if Congress steps forward and says, no, you can't pay this out, they would be pretty solid legally in cutting all of this off. So this story, one, I think it's politically toxic for Trump, because I think a lot of people, I mean, remember the whole Tea Party started out about bailouts for auto companies and for banks and financial companies in 2009. Here we have another slush fund, another bailout, this time for Donald Trump's friends and family. Is that going to be something the public's going to go along with? I think it could become a very big issue for Democrats on the campaign trail, and then also could be a legal issue because of all of these congressmen and not just Democrats, but certain Republicans who are willing to take a stand and say, no, you can't do this.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a renegade Republican in revolt who's been primaried in order to stand against this. Even John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, the Republican leader there, has been saying he's not in favor of this. He doesn't think it looks good. So it may very well mean that it'll come up against quite a lot of political opposition. But this shows you how all of these things are so intermeshed, because yet again, what happened in this little mini Super Tuesday was lawmakers learned, cross Donald Trump at your peril. So at the very point at which something like this is possibly going to come before Congress, it will do so at a time that they know exactly what the risk of voting against Donald Trump might be.
Right. You don't want that black mark on your record if you are hoping to have Donald Trump's support when you run for re-election in November, or you run 2 years from now when you're seeking a Republican nomination. Again, you don't want to end up like Bill Cassidy or Thomas Massie, or John Cornyn. Any of these, their heads have been put on a pike and they're on display outside the White House. And I think it is a warning to all the Republicans who are wondering whether they should take a stand or whether they should go along to get along. Well, that's all for today. If you want to listen to any of our other episodes, you can find them wherever you get your podcasts. Bye now.